I believe in the power of stories. I believe that stories matter. I believe that we need stories in order to live. I grew up in Nsukka, a small university town in Nigeria, and I was very fortunate to grow up in a house filled with books. I read everything I could find. Reading formed me. Reading nurtured me. Reading taught me about the world. Reading gave me confidence. I also started writing at a very young age, and I always knew that writing was the love of my life. I have come to think of literature as my religion. It is literature that shapes the lenses with which I look at the world. I read stories for consolation. I read stories to learn about the world. I read stories so that I do not feel alone. And I have come from experience to believe deeply in the power of storytelling. When I was growing up, I read books from everywhere and books about everything. And it was reading that made me believe in the universality of our human experience. And so, for example, when I read the classic Russian writers, I did not always understand every small detail, but I always understood the human story, the human motivation. And I also learned that there is a universal welcome in literature. Literature is open to everyone. Stories can humanize, and stories can give dignity. My father was a great storyteller. He told us stories of his childhood, and he told those stories so often through the years that I came to know the stories myself, and sometimes I would remind him of a detail that he had forgotten. Through my father's storytelling, my past came alive, my history came alive. I came to feel as if I had known my grandfather, as if I had known my great-grandmother, a woman who was strong and fierce and who pushed back at the cultural conventions that held women back. And she is my feminist role model. My father spoke always in Igbo, except for when he had to explain a particularly complex proverb. And he told the stories always with humor and with wit. And I would soak up all the stories, I would absorb them, I would store them. And as I became older, I began to feel a sense of pride about my Igbo culture. Pride that I came from a wise and humorous and enterprising and kind people. People who resisted British colonization, people who discarded their gods when they were no longer useful to them. And so, in this way, by telling stories, my father gave me the gift of self-confidence. And I am here today confident of my place in the world because I was fortunate enough to be told the stories of who I am. And so let me tell you a small story about a friend of mine, a man from Western Europe. Shortly after Michelle Obama's book, Becoming, was published, this friend told me that he had bought copies of the book and given them to all of his women friends.